thank Deborah and ACT for inviting us to come out here. We've spent a lot of time in the Vancouver area over the past year doing this pilot project with Delta. We met with staff there several times, so it's nice to be back after it's all done to report on the study. I'm going to start with a bit of an anecdote because I thought it was pretty apropos and also quintessentially Canadian. As I was flying here, there was two people sitting behind me on the plane, and they started chit-chatting as we do, and they started talking about, the crazy winter we had and the wacky summer we had and all the rain that, it always rains in BC. And I thought, that it really doesn't matter where you fall on the climate change divide, whether you think it's humans, nature, pirates, whatever. It doesn't matter, in that the beauty of adaptation is it doesn't matter why the climate is changing. Even if you're one of those people who doesn't believe that, humans are causing it, we have to adapt. It is changing. And those people behind me reminded me of that Joe and Jane Citizen, or Joe Plumber, as the Americans refer to him, they know that anecdotal evidence is enough to show them that it's changing. So that's part of what I wanted to touch on today. The other thing is infrastructure is so critically important to both ourselves as residents and municipalities. It protects our life, it protects our health, it affects all the social welfare of all people. So a change in climate means that our infrastructure will be vulnerable, and we'll have to adapt that infrastructure to facilitate those changes. So the how is what I want to touch on today. First, I'll spend just one slide talking about ICLEI, the organization I work for. And then I want to talk about the guidebook that we piloted with Delta as one of our 3 cities. Next, I want to spend the most time talking about what we heard from those cities, about the guidebook and about the process. And then I want to finish up with the recommendations we gave to NRCan on where we could move from here. So, ICLEI, we used to be the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. We rebranded to become ICLEI Local Governments for Sustainability, to look at not just the environment, because our municipalities wanted to look at everything holistically. Environment interacts with economics, and economics interacts with social, which interacts with environment. So we did that. We were established in 1990 at the UN Forum, and we're an international network of local governments. We're about 975 local governments around the world in 68 countries, representing about 400 million people. So we like to think that that's proving that global action really does start locally at home. We're driving change through our programs and campaigns. The most famous one is the PCP, which is the Partners for Climate Protection, which we run jointly with the FCM, and that's looking to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Another one of our programs is the Resilient Communities and Cities Initiative, which we're able to work with Swiss Re on, and that we're working on making resilient communities, so making communities that are disaster-proof, both to economic disasters and natural ones. And lastly, climate adaptation, and that's what we're starting to work on more and more with Canadian municipalities to identify and reduce municipal vulnerabilities to climate change. You can think of us as a bit of an information clearinghouse as well. So we have policy manuals, fact sheets, case studies, and toolkits that we give to our member local governments to work on these issues. And then we focus much of our work on knowledge sharing. So to ensure that the good work here in Metro Van is being shared with St. John's and Sudbury and Toronto, and both that international examples are being brought to Canada. So the guidebook that we piloted, I have one copy here, but if you give me a card I can make sure you can get a copy. It's available for free. It was created in 2007, and you can see co-authored by a group of partners, I suppose, and started by King County, Washington, just south of here. The vision from the guidebook came because County Executive Ron Sims decided that had a climate conference called The Future Ain't What It Used to Be. And from that conference, there was a huge enthusiasm of the participants in that conference and local practitioners, so local engineers, and they all felt that there was a need for additional knowledge on climate change adaptation planning and collaborative strategies to work together on adaptation planning. So that's what gave birth to the guidebook. The guide is meant to serve as a framework that local governments can follow to create an adaptation plan or a preparedness plan. The main focus of the guide is on raising and maintaining interest in preparing for climate change. I think the biggest part is building a climate change preparedness team, both internal within your municipality and externally. identifying and reviewing available scientific information. So all those slides that Dr. McBean put up, municipal staff aren't getting that stuff all the time. They've got to read the 600-page IPCC reports, Lord Stern's report, and it's just another report on their desk. So making sure that that information is being funneled to them. And identifying key community vulnerabilities. That is a huge component of the guidebook. And it's meant to be a process that can be tailored to municipalities. So depending on their resources, both staff and financial, they can alter the process to their own local community. As with all of our ICLEI campaigns and programs, it follows a 5-milestone process, so that after you end each milestone, you really got tangible results that you can then build as your success to step into the next one. So again, target setting, measuring progress toward those targets. So you'll see the first milestone there, initiating your climate resiliency effort. So that is really meant to scope the potential climate change impacts for your community. We heard about regional vulnerabilities. So this is what you're doing. You're saying, in Delta, what is my impact? What are my vulnerabilities? And then passing a climate resolution. So we really ask that when cities get started with the process, that they do have council pass a resolution to really cement climate change adaptation planning into their council. Then building your preparedness team, which I touched on already, and then identifying the planning areas that are relevant to climate change. I would argue there's probably only 1 or 2 that aren't relevant to climate change, but which is definitely what we found in our 3 communities. Conducting a climate resiliency study, or milestone 2, is really the meat and potatoes of the whole exercise. That's when you do your vulnerability assessment, your risk assessment, and then identify your priority planning areas for action. Now that's not an easy task, and we found that we had 1 day to go through that exercise with each of our 3 municipalities, and it wasn't nearly enough time to even get through half of it. So that's why having a team that's dedicated is so important, because these people are going to be eager to meet, once a month, once every 2 weeks, and they'll continue that process. Setting preparedness goals and developing your preparedness plan, that's our 3rd milestone. So this is establishing a vision to then guide your goals and then create concrete actions towards that. Implementing your preparedness plan, that's obvious what that is. And then measuring progress and updating your plan. This one's key because you really have to develop and track your progress, because the science will change. That amount of precipitation, it's going to become more refined. The amount of sea level rise is going to become more refined. So then the folks at Delta will really have to take, okay, well, it's not 50 centimeters anymore, it's now 80 centimeters. What does that mean for our infrastructure? So what were we tasked with? We were tasked to find out, will it work for Canadian municipalities? Because it was designed to be for U.S. local and regional governments, and you'll see that about a third of the book is really the science for the Midwest, the California, the East Coast. So Natural Resources Canada commissioned us to look at identifying the needs of Canadian municipalities vis-a-vis the guidebook. Will this work for them? Are there gaps in resources available? While we were doing the study, the report that Dr. McBean referred to kept getting delayed. So it only came out right towards the end of our studies, which we were able to give that to our municipalities. But that's the sort of, it was waited for. People were really sitting, the folks in the adaptation world were really sitting on the edge of their seats waiting for that thing to be produced. So 7 cities, we put out the call to our members in Canada, and 7 cities were shortlisted, with 3 ultimately being chosen, which were Greater Sudbury in Ontario, St. John's, Newfoundland, and Delta, which I've alluded to. Now, each of those was facing a variety of climate impacts, and I think not more importantly, but equally importantly, they all were working in really different political frameworks for getting into adaptation planning. So we were asked to look at the first 3 milestones, which I won't go through again, but those that we were not, because the cities weren't creating an actual implementation plan, we were only asked to brainstorm going through the process. During the workshops, we used a series of exercises and brainstorming sessions to facilitate that process. So I'm going to jump ahead, and I'm sorry, but this is in the wrong order, but I'll go back. So this is just a sample of one of the exercises we did. So this is deltas. You'll notice that we looked at one sector, identified the planning area that was relevant to, and then we were to identify what impacts could occur within that sector. So I think this is what Dr. Mabin was referring to, that municipal staff really are experts in the infrastructure in their area. So nobody knows better the impact of sea level rise on the dikes in Delta than the engineers in Delta, because they're the ones who are out there sandbagging, you know, before every winter, and they're the ones out there that are doing that work. You'll notice in coastal areas, you'll notice that coastal resources and ecosystems was a big issue because sea level rise is, you know, a key climate change impact here. According to the latest IPCC report, it was expected to rise by approximately 60 centimeters by 2100. Now I'm confusing, that might have not been IPCC, that might have been the BC chapter of the NRCan report, so I apologize for that. And I'm going to read this directly, but the folks in Delta told us that such a rise would inundate approximately 4,600 hectares of farmland and more than 15,000 hectares of industrial and residential urban areas in BC. We found out that approximately 220,000 people live near or below sea level rise in Richmond and Delta together and are protected by over 120 kilometers of dikes. You'll be quite surprised to find out those dikes are not built to withstand 60 centimeters more water. So those, you may not have an ocean view front home now, but you probably will by 2100. So one of the things that I think was most shocking that we found out is Delta's been going out to the residents who don't want the dikes in front of their house and have been saying, you know, we have to extend the dike range. The residents have said no, because they don't want their view blocked. So this is a huge obstacle, and I think insurance will play a big part in them changing their mind, but I think also municipal staff will have to